Hello and welcome to another episode of Up Your Assets. I'm your host, Ray Ferrara, CFP, and I'm the founder and executive chair of Provise Management Group, which is a SEC-registered investment advisor managing about $2 billion as of the end of 2025. Today's podcast will talk about ways to keep all of your personal data as secure as possible. We've all heard about bad actors are always trying to steal personal identifiable information and break into our accounts to steal money. There is no way to totally guarantee that your computer is completely safe, but you need to do everything possible to try. In addition, how do you protect your home and business premises? To help us address these and other securities issues, today we have Ken Washington as our guest. Ken is the Chief Information Officer for Tampa Port Authority, where he has worked since 1996. As the CIO, Ken assumes a pivotal role in steering the strategic direction of the organization's information technology endeavors, while also orchestrating the development, implementation, and appraisal of all technology frameworks and infrastructure vital to Port Tampa Bay's operations. You can imagine that security is at the top of his responsibilities. Ken, welcome to the Up Your Assets podcast.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for having me.
Ken, anything you'd like to add about your background for our audience other than that brief description that I gave?
No, I think you made me look very well on that description. Thank you.
Well, that's great. I do know you were in the service, and I just want to thank you once again for the many years of service that you provided to us while you were in the military.
Thank you.
So, Ken, let's start at the most basic level. I can imagine that keeping your computer fully up to date is something we should all do. How often is it necessary to update the computer, and when is the best time to do it?
So, Ray, when it comes to updating the computer, my recommendation has always been if there's an update out there, there's a reason for that update. You may want to apply it as soon as you see it. And if you don't see it or you don't regularly check your computer, I think you need to get into the habit of regularly checking and applying that update immediately. There used to be a time where people wouldn't apply updates because typically, especially when it comes to Microsoft, you apply an update, some other application is not ready or prepared for it. But I think in today's world, in order to be safe, it's best to have that security patch already applied than not.
So when I get an email often that says, time to update something to that effect, is there any concern about that maybe coming from bad actors itself? Should we be protecting ourselves when that comes in, or can we rely on the source?
So what I would do when it comes to getting notifications of updates, they typically come from the software themselves. If you see any updates that's coming outside of a specific software, such as Windows would already apply or tell you that they have an update ready and it's coming from inside of Windows, you need to apply that. Same thing with Macs or iOS devices. They have a great process by which when they send an update, they notify you, and typically you want to run it at night. I would run it right away. When you get an update or a claim to be an update outside of those applications, those are the ones you need to scrutinize and be very, very wary of. And more than likely, I wouldn't even apply them, because if it's a true update, then it'll come back anyway, or it's already scheduled to be done between 12 and 3 in the morning anyway.
Good. All right. Well, let's talk about those pesky passwords. We have to have them, some of them more complicated they are, I know, the more secure. But what makes a password a strong password as people are opening up new applications and et cetera? And once you have a strong password, why shouldn't you use it at multiple sites? Everybody tells me, Ray, you can't use the same password at multiple sites. So what makes a strong password? Why not use it more than once if it's a good, strong password?
So I think we need to get away from the term password, because when you say password, people look at just one single word. It needs to be talked about as a passphrase When you say a passphrase, then you're looking at something that you can remember. So first of all, I think a good passphrase need to be at least, at a minimum, 15 characters with a special character in there, with at least one capital letter and some lowercase letters, and then a number. And what I tell people most of the time, what they need to do is think of a song, think of a movie, think of a saying that nobody, can relate to you or connect with you, and then change some of the characters in there. Like instead of having O, the letter O, have a zero. And if you can do that, it makes it very, very difficult. On top of the fact that it's 15 characters or more, it makes it very difficult for an encryption software and or somebody else, one, to guess your password, and two, for encryption software to kind of break it. Not saying it can't, it just takes a lot longer.
So let me see if I understand that. Let's suppose I'm a great Disney fan and I could use I love Mickey Mouse number sign 33. You're saying that that would be a nice strong password, being 15 more than 15 or more characters, something I could remember fairly easily. And then if I want to use the same thing at a different website, just make a small change to that, but don't use the same one every time.
That is absolutely correct. And the reason you don't want to use the same password, is recommended that you don't use the same passwords across platforms, is because if one platform get compromised, then more than likely, and if they are aware of you and know about you, they can compromise your other platforms just by logging into those same areas using the same credentials that we just discussed.
Now, when you say platforms, what does that mean? I'm trying to understand that term.
So platforms, we use the term platforms now because we talk about most of the things that are sitting in the cloud. They're in the cloud solutions. But for all intents and purposes, especially for home use, just say applications or portal pages like your bank versus, your gym membership versus, your email or something like that.
Well, I got it. Now I understand. So, talking about passwords, I got to admit, I have a coded list that I keep at my desk with just enough information there for me to then know what the password is. Difficult for others, even if they got it. But one of the nice things is today, most of the computers will store your passwords for you so that when you go to the site, the username and the password are automatically filled in by your computer and the little application that's on it. What are your thoughts, recommendations about using that or not?
So I think that's a great thing to use. However, there has to be some other parameters in place if you're going to do that. I mean, if you're going to store or cache your passwords on your PC so it autofill for any site that you go to, then that means that I think that in order to log into your PC, you have to have a highly encrypted, very difficult password to access that PC. 'Cause you wouldn't want just anybody just walking up to your PC. You got a password called passwords. Then they have access to all the applications that you have on your PC. So I think it's two folds to that. Actually, it's multiple folds to that, not just two. But at a minimum, I think you have to make sure that just entry to your PC, both physically, meaning do they have to come to your home, go into the bedroom to get to your computer, as well as having a password or a passphrase strong enough that it's going to take them a long time to try to guess it just to get inside to get to an application that's already been cached in there and it provides passwords for you.
All right. Now, more and more, and particularly when we're dealing with financial matters, and again, I appreciate it. We got to have all the security, and certainly I don't want to be hacked any more than anybody else. But I think many of us, myself included, this is just overboard. It's more than I need to do. But even though I have a strong password, et cetera, more and more programs or applications, platforms or applications will require multi-factor authentication or MFA. First of all, it does add a second layer. You might talk to that, but then many sites don't have that. Is there a way to add the multi-factor authentication to a sign-on somewhere that would make sense for us?
Yeah, there's companies out there like Okta, for example. That's one of the biggest MFA companies out there. Is application independent, is agnostic actually. And what it does is it'll work with the vast majority of the application out there, but it puts that extra layer of protection on your system. So what multi-factor authentication really does is you have you have to have access to the physical device. You have to put a passphrase in there that's secure. Multi-factor, put another layer on there and say, not only am I going to put a password in, you're going to have a password on your system, but when you log in, I'm going to send you some verification that only you can verify. And then you got to put that in on top to make sure that it's you. So it's like checking 2 and 3 times that the person who's trying to get access to certain areas have the authority to have access to it.
Yeah, excellent. And as you're talking about the benefits of MFA, you mentioned Okta. That's OKTA.
Correct.
That's a company that has an application that one puts on their telephone so that if you apply it to any platform or application that you go to, it'll force you to use the multi-factor authentication. And clearly, in our business, dealing with the securities and finances of individuals, we try to put MFA on as many of those platforms as we possibly can, and we encourage our clients to do it on their own computers.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Ken, let's turn to our networks and connecting to the internet. This will be both at home and at the office. What security should I have on my router at home and or my and
So this becomes a little bit more complicated because the average user wouldn't know how to do this, nor would they really want or think about invoking it. But what I would suggest always, if you have a router at home, your router gives off IP addresses. IP addresses are things that allow computers to talk and actually traverse their network to get onto the internet. The first thing I would do with a router is change the backend IP scheme to what they call private IPs, which are not routable, even though the IP address that you get with your router is typically the same IP address every single device is given, every single one of them. Having said that, you want to change that because that's always like a 192.168.1.1. If you get a brand new router or if you get a brand new device, it's going to have that IP address on it. That's the default. Most hackers already know this. So they have a running start of getting into your system. What you want to do is change the back end and say, I'm going to change that IP scheme. And there's a certain amount that you could change it to. But let's say you change it to 10.0.0.1. Well, now you put another phase in there. And if they got to your router, they couldn't get to any devices that's on your network. That's probably the first thing you want to do. The second thing you want to do is get a firewall that's put behind your router, even if you didn't change the router IP address, that gives you a level of protection. And again, these not typical things that users would know how to do, but any provider will offer that service up to you. And typically they give it to you for free once you start off with their service. They'll configure it for you. And I think that'll work for them. I don't typically like that because if they're configuring the service for you, then somebody in that particular company knows what they configured for you, so they have access to it. So I would work with somebody independently to have to do that. The last thing I would do is I would have a VPN service, which is a software, whether it's ExpressVPN or NordVPN. What VPN does is mask who you are. So anytime you log into your computer, if you don't do anything, you may want to do this. And this is the simplest and most easiest activity that you can invoke. But you download the software. Let's say you download ExpressVPN. It kind of configures itself. You literally push a button every time you want to go onto the internet and it masks who you are. It masks where you're from, who you are. It also masks what city you come from if you wanted to change that to what country, and you'll be able to get in. It's a level of protection on top of some of the other protections such as virus scan and malware that'll help you out if you don't have the capabilities of doing a router change or adding a firewall.
Ken, that's my mind is going all kinds of different places. You mentioned the IP address, and I'm thinking of my router at home, which is it's connected to a cell tower through Verizon. And I did not know that everybody who probably has that same router has the same IP address. How do I actually change that? I've always thought it was specific to that router and that you couldn't change it.
So it is specific to that router in the sense that they all start off with a 192.168 one dot something. So the last digit is what identifies you and your router. That's the back end. The front end, they have a whole different DHCP, was what it's called. And I don't really want to get into that because a whole lot of stuff, but they have a whole different IP screen that the ISP, which is your internet service provider, talks to the router. And then the router distributes addresses on the back end. Every router has a configuration page, and most providers allow you to go to that router and change that configuration page. I haven't seen one yet that doesn't allow you to do that, but it can be extremely complicated. Most of the time, I tell people if you get a firewall and put it behind your router and get that configured, you don't have to worry about the router. If you get a VPN, which is the software, which is probably the easiest, and mind you, that's subscription based, by the way. You can pay for it annually, you can pay for it monthly, but it's pretty much a nominal fee, especially when you consider protection. Then that probably be the easiest route to go. The ISP, they can assist you with changing your IP scheme and so on and so on.
All right. Um, so, I travel quite a bit from time to time. I'm at the airport. I sign on to their public network so I can work on emails or read stuff on the internet. Or maybe I'm going to get a Starbucks coffee. What can I do to protect the computer while I'm in these public places using very public networks?
Hey, because you're my friend, the first thing I'm gonna say is don't. But having said that, I do understand it's a necessity for a lot of people. And I think the easiest thing to do is download a VPN, the software, because you can run that from your phone as well. If you're gonna connect to a foreign network, meaning a network unknown by you, you don't know what protection is just a public network that provides free Wi-Fi, always invoke your VPN. And that's probably the safest thing to do. The other safest thing to do is do what I do. I always travel with a hotspot. I never join any public networks. I have my hotspot with me no matter where I go. It's a little brick like, but at the end of the day, I'm always connected to a network that I control. I know who has access, and I can tell you who's joining my network. So that way, nobody will sniff your information and or get your information without you knowing it.
Now I have a hotspot on my phone that I can use. Is that just as good as this brick thing that you were talking about?
It is. It
Okay.
is. So the brick thing is a little puck. It's about this size, about 3 by 3, or maybe 4 by 4. And what it does is it just creates your own network. Your phone acting as a hotspot is the same thing. I would rather for you to join that than to join a public Wi-Fi.
Got it. Well, I'll change my nasty habits. I always worry about if I use the hotspot too much, I'll burn up the time on my phone. But I guess I'm just going to have to plug the phone in more and use that as opposed to the public networks that are there. What about when I'm on a plane? Same thing. I mean, obviously, I can't use my phone at that point. But if I had one of these bricks, will that allow me to connect to the internet um, with while I'm on the plane?
Unfortunately, they will not. They don't operate that way because you're in the skies at that time. I think at that point, that's where you want to use the VPN. And if you're worried about the minutes on your phone, then again, the other option is get your software, the VPN on your phone and your laptop, and just if you got to plug in or you're going to plug into public networks, just make sure you run that, and you can run that on the plane as well.
I wasn't too worried about the minutes on the phone, as much as I was just the power on the phone, but
Right.
your point is well taken. The ultimate answer to several of the questions that we've just been talking about is get a VPN, a virtual private network on your computer, and that's your best way connecting to any part of the internet to keep yourself protected. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
Well, many people think that once they have loaded antivirus and malware protection, they're safe and nobody can get in. What things do they need to be thinking about when choosing this type of software?
So that's not true. You still can get in. What it does is prevent nefarious people from backdooring you. If you've got, so the rule of thumb is if you traverse the internet and you go out to a site that's probably compromised, that site can come back into you. And what virus software and malware software does, it scans your PC or scans the site as you already connected. By that time, it's too late. It's like the thief. You let the thief in the front door. you open the door for him to get in. Now he can kind of get where he wants to go. You got to be very, very careful with that. I think, first of all, as far as choosing the software, it just depends on the platform and the ease of use that people are comfortable with. They all do fairly good jobs. None of them do a complete job. I mean, that's just the nature of it. It depends on how quickly, you know, a virus is discovered versus how quickly they get a signature or an update out to you. But I think if you do your due diligence you got to at least have that, especially when it comes to email. And I think you need to do the other things that we discussed earlier, whether it's a firewall, a VPN, and multi-factor authentication. You got to do all those things in conjunction with having virus software and malware to protect yourself. It's just layer upon layer.
Well, funny that you mentioned emails because my next question was going to be, we all get and send more emails than we know what to do with from time to time. For me, I would say that I probably get close to 250 emails a day, of which a good probably 30% are just some type of solicitation. But every once in a while, I'll get one that comes from an unknown source. And then some will come from what appears to be a well-known source, but it's really a fake. How does one protect themselves from clicking on those malicious emails or those malicious links? How can you tell whether it's legitimate or not?
Best way to tell if it so the best way to tell if an email is legitimate is to look at the header information. So if you look at the metadata, like basically where's the email coming from? If the name or the name and the domain is somebody that you know, then more than likely that's a legitimate email that's coming from a source of known destiny, however, entity. But however, doesn't necessarily mean the email is still good. The other thing is the ones that we have a rule of thumb in IT. If you don't know who they are, delete it. If you don't know where it's from, delete it. If it's important, the people who are trying to reach you, they eventually call you. That's how we look at it. I think that's the safest way to take it. For the ones that you do know, because they may have got infected and you get infected, you know, that may happen from time to time. There's really nothing you could do about that because unless they notified you and told you that they've been, compromised, that's just a risk that you're gonna have to take. But for the most part, I think if you'll get the vast majority of them if you just delete the ones you don't know, the ones that are soliciting you don't have any idea about, and the ones that has fake information in the metadata, the header information.
Well, I have to say that clearly within our business, we have to be extra, extra careful. But thieves are really very clever. We had a situation one time where it looked like a legitimate email. The only difference was that they had put two V's, little V's next to each other, and it looked like a W, which is what they wanted us to see. Fortunately, we were able to catch that. It was more luck than it was anything else, but they can be very clever. So it's important to really look at those emails and make sure that there aren't those little subtle differences. Another one that we've seen more and more is that you mentioned briefly before an O, but they put a zero instead, and it looks like it's a capital O at a quick glance. So people have got to really be careful.
They do. And the other thing, there's one more thing that you can do, but again, when you talk about home versus business, the cost, can offset a lot of that. But from a business perspective, there are services out there that would actually, they call mail gateway filters. They will actually scan your software for any known activity and they will pull it for you and then give you the ability to review it and see if it should be released or stay quarantined and or deleted. We use a lot of those services. We have three of those and they all overlap. So what one won't catch, the other one will.
And what was the service called again, Ken?
So you can use one called Avanan, is Avanan by Checkpoint. And the one that I like the most is called Proofpoint. And those services, all they do is monitor, scan all email. They literally, what all email that comes in, it comes in to those services first that kind of just cleans it and go through everything and they look for anomalies and they'll pull it and then they'll notify you of those anomalies and then you can make a decision how you want to move forward first. But again, that's a service and it can be costly and so much that it's not feasible probably for a home user or a typical home user, but definitely for a business.
Got it. Proof point, and what was the other one?
Avanon.
Okay, great. So, got to back up that computer just in case, there's a big electric wave here in Florida that we get a big pulse that blows up the computer or whatever else. What's the best and the safest way to back up your computer to make sure your data doesn't get corrupted?
So I think there's different ways you can back up your computer. The first thing I would say, don't back up your computer to your computer. That's first and foremost. If you back it up to an external device, make sure that device is somewhere other than where your computer at or still plugged into your computer, because that's supposed to be something that you return to in the event that you do have this catastrophic, situation. If you back it up to the cloud, that's great. It can be great. Make sure it's a high performance cloud service that specializes in that. The good thing about doing that is that you can get your data and restore it from anywhere. You don't necessarily have to be at your computer to restore it back to that location, particularly if it's already been compromised. So it's really a comfort level. The key about backing up is make sure you back it up, remove it, put it somewhere where it's safe, and back up regularly. So any changes that you make or any documents that you add, you need to make sure those are on there. Otherwise, you go back to a moment in time that may be too far back or maybe missing some critical information.
Got it. Well, just in case the listeners didn't catch all of the different things that we were just talking about, Up Your Assets has put together a computer security checklist for our followers. And so if any of you who would like to get a copy of the security checklist, just drop me an email at ray@upyourassets.org. That's ray@upyourassets.org. And we'll email out the security checklist for you to have, and then you can make sure that your computer make sure that it's got as much coverage as you can possibly give it. Um, so let's take for a moment, chat a little bit. In the news over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of information that has come out about what appears to be a kid, maybe a missing person, a home out in Arizona. I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. So it was, as we were preparing for this, it made me think about how do you use technology to protect the house or a place of business? Let's start with just as we did with the home, what are the basics?
So I think what you can do, there's cheap forms of security, things that you could put in place, right? And I say cheap forms because there's everybody has a different level of finances that they want to use for technology. Some people just fray away from technology. But when it comes to technology, you can easily get a camera that you can pay a one-time fee for and stick it somewhere. Most people use Ring. I've seen people put Ring doorbells on the side of their house just for the camera purpose of it, right? Now you don't have to do that. They actually have a Ring camera that you could use that's not necessarily a doorbell, but people do that all the time. I think that locks, I'm a big proponent in having not only just key locks, but they also electronic locks because not so much of access, but I can also tell when somebody actually comes into my house, how that it, when they came into a specific location or enters. So I think when it comes to technology and securing yourself, I think these days, you have to do the minimum. I mean, if you look at like my neighborhood, I think there's not a house that doesn't have a Ring or they don't have camera systems, whether they function or not is not necessarily as important unless you get broken into, but it is a deterrent just from people seeing things like that.
Well, Ken, during the Super Bowl, in fact, there was a commercial for a Ring doorbell, and it said you don't need to have an account to enjoy some of the benefits. How is that possible? I mean, what benefit is it just to have a camera out there? Where's the stuff going if it's not going to an account?
So when Ring say you need to have an account, that's an account for you to view your stuff that's already happened. So when you buy a Ring camera, you get what they call like live view. You get motion detection. And when somebody walks up or your camera motion has been triggered, you have a short period of time to look at your device and see who's there or what's going on. That's straight up through any of those camera systems that have a subscription. What the subscription does, it allows you to go back in time. Let's say you were in a meeting, you got an alert, and it's 30 minutes or an hour later. Whereas if you didn't have a subscription, that's gone. You're not going to have anything on your device that shows that. If you have a subscription, you can go back and see what actually transpired. And you can go back 30 to 60 days, which I think is the default, but the maximum is 180 days, where you can just go back and see all the video that of any incident that may have happened in your house, as well as it gives you the ability to share that information with other people. So they do have what they call like a community, and you can share, somebody trying to breaking in your house at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can share that with the other people in the community if you have a subscription.
So, Ken, again, going back to the situation with Savannah Guthrie's mother in Arizona, at first they said because she didn't have a subscription, there wasn't any video evidence. But then, I don't know, 10 days, 2 weeks into the whole thing, suddenly they got a picture of the guy here on the front porch. Where the heck did that come from?
So what Ring does is those recordings goes up to Ring Cloud. And although she doesn't have a subscription, she can't get to it, but Ring does have access to it.
Wow. You're
Yes.
kidding. I mean, so they're recording everything and storing it, even though I'm not.
Even though you're not, and all that means is that you don't have access to it. They never say they don't store. They will always say you can't go back and see it. That's what that means. But in the case of criminal activity or warrant, they have to provide that to law enforcement. So even if you take that situation, that unfortunate situation with Savannah Guthrie's mom, the assailant apparently ripped the Ring device off as well, right? Off the wall, right? To whatever he thought he was doing. But Ring was able to go back and see what had already transpired and provide that to law enforcement to give them a better idea, as well as the public, as to who is possibly doing some things.
Now, do you have the right to maybe opt out of that if you read the terms and conditions carefully enough?
Absolutely. So you have to what they call is, I call it a buy-in, but you have to sign up for community stuff. If you wanted to go, you have the right to say no. You want to keep your stuff private. But again, if it's a warrant or a serious grave situation, law enforcement does have access to get that information still.
Well, it doesn't seem like there's many a day that goes by that we don't hear about, a mass shooting somewhere, whether it's just 2 people or 20 people in schools, at the mall, places of business, et cetera. How do you feel about having firearms at both the home and the office? And if you think it's a good idea, what precautions should one be taking?
So I'm ex-military. So firearms are a very important part of my life. I think at the home, just as I do at the office, I don't really necessarily have a problem with firearms at the office. I do have a problem with people who have firearms and not properly trained and or certified. I think that's has to happen if you're going to allow firearms at the office. And certain jobs, around schools and government buildings and stuff like that, I don't think you should be able to bring them into the office. But I am a big proponent of the right to bear arms.
I have to tell a personal story. When I wasn't well trained on a firearm, my wife and I were living in Texas at the time, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, we both suddenly awakened in what seemed to be glass that was breaking. And I mean, it was loud, it was distinct, and it woke up both of us. And I did go to the drawer and pull out the 38 snub nose that I had then. And I told my wife, I said, stay here. If you hear the gun go off, call 911. And I went in and I checked the doors in the back, and they all seemed to be secure. I went through the kitchen into the dining room, and as I turned to go into the living room, there was this person silhouetted right in front of me. And my wife didn't listen to me. She was walking in trying to find out what was going on. And I got to tell you, every time I tell that story, Ken, I shudder and shake at what almost happened.
Wow.
So I agree with you. Have that good training to know how to really use and when not to use, a firearm. Well,
Great.
Ken, we've covered a lot of territory today in this Up Your Assets episode of today. Any last words that you have for our listeners about security that we missed that you wanted to add?
I think the only thing I would say is, a lot of people put a lot of efforts in their business or at their job, maybe because some of it is not their responsibility, so has to be done. But they see it, they kind of understand it. I think you need to put the same effort at your home, if not more, because now this directly affects you and not necessarily a business where you can probably go get another job or what have you. This affects your lifestyle and your home. So I think you need to put that same effort and due diligence and understanding and protecting yourself from a technology perspective.
Well, Ken, it's been great to have you on the podcast today. I want to remind all of our followers about the checklist that I talked about. If you'd like to have the checklist for your computer at home, make sure that you have as much coverage as you can possibly get on it. Just send me an email, ray@upyourassets.org, ray@upyourassets.org, and we'll shoot an email out and get you the checklist. Ken, again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ray. Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, we'll have another episode for you in a few weeks. And in the meantime, go out there and up your assets.
This has been another edition of the Up Your Assets podcast hosted by Ray Ferrara, CFP founder and executive chair of Provise Management Group, LLC. The preceding presentation was for general information purposes only and not personalized advice. Seek out a professional before making any financial decisions. Additionally, no guests pay to be on the show or are paid to be on the show. The opinions expressed are their own and not the host's or the show.